radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. Yes, it was a crazy day in the world of live streaming around the world. But today is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. And I'm your host, Jimmy Church. All right. So, yeah, it was. I started getting the notifications earlier today, and they were coming in via email from our streaming company and YouTube. And a couple of weeks ago, it was Facebook. And then a week before that, it was Twitter. Very strange, because a lot of these companies, and we'll get straight to the show, but a lot of these companies, you pay a premium for this service, where you have their platform, their software, and then it streams out to 10, 20, 30 sources all at the same time. So you don't have to have multiple screens running. And it used to be with this show many years ago, I did have 2 or 3 computers sending out individual streams, and then it would go out from there to multiple streams. And it was a very complicated mess to do. I had to fire up 4 or 5, 6 buttons at the start of each show just to make things happen. And now it's just, it's supposed to be, right? Just one click and everything is automated across all of my computers here. But it appears that everything is up and running. I am very happy about that. And let's see here. Great to see. So it looks like the chat says everything is cool. So let's just go with that. Great week on the show. Monday, Constance Victoria Briggs was here. And then last night, John Kachuba. Tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein is here. And it's going to be a full night of science tonight. Really looking forward to this. And everything that falls underneath that umbrella in our community. And it is the multiverse and remote viewing and contact and disclosure and technology. All of that is going to be discussed tonight with Dr. Simeon Hein. And then tomorrow night, it's John Greenwald Jr. for the Fade to Black Vault. That's tomorrow night on the show. Tonight, though, Dr. Simeon Hein is back with us. We're going to be talking about the multiverse, physics, remote viewing. I'm going to throw some CERN in. We did just have a solar eclipse. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but it happened on Monday. And we had a solar eclipse, and a bunch of things happened on that day that all dealt with the universe and physics. And we had NASA launching 3 rockets. Of course, we had totality, CERN firing up on that day too as well. And I think we're going to get some disclosure in. And if we're really lucky, a little added bonus, we'll do some Bigfoot. He is a former university professor in statistics and research models. He came across remote viewing in 1996 and started to take training on that as a skeptic, by the way. But he learned remote viewing, and he found out that there's a lot of scientific knowledge that is being withheld from the public on this stuff. And he is right. He now has established the Institute for Resonance and began teaching remote viewing in Boulder, Colorado. He continues to teach online. And we did crop circles on Christina's show last week. He's got a great book on crop circles too as well. And his links for everything are below at mountbaldy.com. And I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black. There he is right there, Dr. Simeon Hein. Doc,
Hey, Jimmy.
It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me here tonight.
Yeah, it's always great when you're on the show. And what I enjoy, I'm going to tell everybody what you said earlier. Okay, this is great. I said, we're doing sound check. I said, so the last time you were on the show, and Simeon goes, let me stop you right there. The only thing I remember was guitars and music. And I was with, just a little side note, I was with Ron Keel over the weekend. I went to go see him in Hollywood. He played the whiskey. And, great singer, great musician, but he's really into the conspiracy subjects. He's got a great radio network and he's a great radio host. He's also an awesome lead singer. And I've known him for a long time, and he reached out to me and many years ago. Is this the same Jimmy Church? And I was like, all right. And I was like, is this the same Ron Keel? And we vetted each other. But here's the thing, Simeon, I started this show to just be me, not wear a mask.
Yeah.
And so the real me is who's talking right now. I like guitars. I like conspiracies, right? I like ancient history. I like science. I like physics. I've made contact. And I also like really good food. So if I could talk about all of those things, I would be happy. And what I found out was my audience is the same as me. They love music, the rock and roll, and UFOs, and a little bit of science. And that's the world. I'm not. I thought I was a loner out there, but it turns out you're the same way, aren't you?
Yeah, hallelujah to all of that. Yeah, no, you have to be yourself in this world. From the moment, you show up here, it's trying to make you fit in and conform and just be like everybody else for the most part. And it's quite a battle every day, I feel, to be yourself, to be true to yourself. And that's what this is all about. And I think the more that you follow the things that really give you happiness and fulfillment and joy in life, the better person you are, and you're better to everyone around you. And I think, you just make the whole thing better that way by doing what makes you feel complete, not what you've been told you should be doing. There's a difference.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's kind of weird, but there's a comparison here. It's like David Carradine in Kung Fu, right? Where he had this one way of life. He makes the change. You remember to take the pebbles from my hand, grasshopper. And he found out about fulfillment and bliss. And that's the journey to the keys of life. And defining true happiness. It's not trying to be somebody else that you're not. It's very strange. It's an easy concept, but for some reason everybody fights it. Right? They'd rather be bad. they'd rather be, because it's easier. It's
when we're younger, we have these natural abilities, these connections to the larger universe. I think what a lot of folks are, experiencing is they've lost that connection to something deep inside themselves that they had as a child. And somewhere along the line, they got the same message that we all get, which is you can't be that person. You have to be what we want you to be. And this goes in, month out through all of your education. And I think by the time you become, an adult like we are of this sort of age, you might have actually forgotten who that person was, who could really be satisfied with very simple things, a couple of musical notes playing around. And if we can get a connection back to that, I actually think that has a lot to do with all of these topics, because I've often said with regards to remote viewing, it's not something you learn how to do. It's something you learn how to remember that you used to be able to do when you were younger, before everyone told you to stop playing with those imaginary friends and stop daydreaming, and stop using your imagination. If you can remember that, that's really what RV is. It's not learning something new. It's getting in touch with the person that you are.
Yeah, if there is one thing that I'm 60, okay, I'm 60 years old, and I'm at the point now, and this started maybe 10 years ago, like for real, but you get to a point in your life where you can actually go back and analyze the different phases, right? The innocence of childhood, but then you get to be 18, 19, and 20, and you find out that that life is crazy. Then you have to face moving on and starting your life, moving out of the house and doing all of that stuff, and either continuing your education, but starting your journey, right? Leaving the nest. And then, but as you get to be an adult, then you realize there's that phase of your life. And then you get to your 30s and you kind of question what are your goals. You get into your 40s and you're like, man, I've achieved most of these goals, but I don't feel enlightened. Right. I don't feel as, and you get to be, once you get to 50, you're like, man, I wasted it. I should have spent those 30 years chasing knowledge and bliss and happiness instead of chasing what I was told to chase. And that, you know what I mean? You wax all philosophical from 50 on.
Yeah, the Eastern philosopher of Buddhism and Taoism, Alan Watts, he used to talk about this a lot, and he would say things that, he was really funny. He would say sort of what you said. You kept thinking, oh, I finished high school. Now, like, things really start. And then, oh, no, you have to finish college first. Then life really started. Graduate school, professional life. Somehow you're always chasing something a little down the road. And then you think that's when life starts. And as you're saying, you get to your 50s and you realize maybe the whole thing was a hoax.
Yeah.
I don't really feel any different than I did when I was 12. I mean, I do, but you know what I mean. So
yeah, it's so funny. And I have definitely resolved in myself, and this is the message I have for everybody. And I try to mention it once a day. I want it just in everybody's brain. If you're not listening to the show now, maybe you'll catch it in a week or a month in the archives or whatever, but you're going to hear this repeating theme. And that repeating theme is life is short, man. Spend it happy. Don't mess around. Don't waste a minute in negativity or wasted time, because you don't want to get to the end of days and go, man, I can't get that time back that I wasted tripping out, being negative. And that's not what life is about. And that's it. I'm spending the rest of my time here happy. That's it. That's it, man. I don't give a crap what people think, what people say. I just don't. And I think that's the meaning of life is happiness and love. Really, I think that's it.
no, I agree. That very well said. It's totally true. One of these qigong energy teachers that I used to work with, Montauk Chia, who I learned a ton from about taking care of yourself and keeping a strong energy field and being positive and so forth. He used to say it's sort of like chasing tiger milk and dragon meat. These unattainable things that you think you want. You think that'll just do everything for you, but you can never really get it. And you spend so much of your life. And then you get to our age. I'm about the same age as you. And you wonder, well, actually, I'm like more than halfway through it at this point. So there's no point in chasing the illusions. You might as well do things that have like an immediate energetic feedback, right? Music for us, guitars, things like that. And these topics, you're not thinking, well, where is it going to lead me? You're just involved in it because it's real, it's true. It has integrity. I think that's what it comes down to. And that, what I think we call it intrinsic value. That's kind of a psychological. But it's important to do things that have intrinsic value, not to keep chasing this illusory goal that you'll never actually catch up to.
Yeah, intrinsic is a really good word for that. And the other part of this, though, this is an easy segue with you, because we have the other issue that you firmly understand, and that's statistics, numbers, data. where is that leading us? And we have our strange fascination in our community with all things paranormal and supernatural and ET and contact and remote viewing and whatever it may be, right? But science, which is chasing these numbers and these algorithms and collecting this data, analyzing it, interpolating it, and then coming back to us with what they are doing, is pointing right back at our community. Right, that's the bizarre thing, where the world of physics and the hard sciences fought consciousness, right? Fought the strange and the mysterious. But now today it's 11 dimensions and entanglement and the multiverse. It's crazy, isn't it?
Right. It's a really peculiar situation because, just like you're saying, formal mainstream science has been really narrowly focused on just a small range of topics and all of the things that we're interested here and the audience and so forth. There's been a huge backlash against those topics for quite a while now. But at the same time, it just flows out of physics and quantum mechanics and even statistics. Because when I was learning statistics and later taught it, Jimmy, I always felt there was something wrong with the idea of normalcy. All of modern statistics is built around averages and standard deviations and this idea, the normal person. And a lot of people, you read this in Science magazine now, are unhappy with the way statistics presented it. Even the founders of statistics, people like Galton and Fisher and Pierce, and we have tests and statistical processes named after these founders. I mean, they have taken down those people's statues. They've removed their names from buildings because nowadays this preoccupation with normalcy just seems wrong. Some people think it's racist. Some people think you can't just compare everyone to the normal person, this fictitious normal person. It's an idea that came out of Victorian England, right? And the United States is a country that broke away from that several hundred years ago because people couldn't stand it anymore. Okay. And so, it was a little more complicated than that, but we don't live by that. If you just had this normalcy, we wouldn't be the people that we are. We wouldn't even have any of the things around us that were invented by innovators and people at the time who were thought to be crackpots, visionaries, dreamers. Those people had to break away from the norm. So that's the real challenge, is how do we transform science that's not so preoccupied with fictitious ideas like averages and standard deviations. And I will tell you why. Because in that mindset, you're allowed to throw out outliers.
That's right. And
Allowed to throw them away from your data set, and those outliers could be what you should be looking at.
100%. I always thought, when you're first taught, I'm going to say infamous, okay, instead of famous. Let's go with the bell curve, right? And you're taught the significance of the bell curve. I used to look at that and go, I'm out here. I'm one of these guys, right? That's where the interesting stuff is. It's not this big chunk in the middle. Right, it's that, and so the Newtons of the world, the Copernicuses and the Galileos and the Teslas, those dudes are on the way outside of the bell curve.
Yeah,
right, and you're absolutely right. And normalcy and the bell curve and averages goes against one of the basic laws of physics and quantum mechanics, and that's probability, that everything can and will happen. So that takes normalcy out, and that's the outliers that you're talking about. Those outliers will happen too, and will probably be very significant events when they do happen.
exactly. Outliers can go mainstream. And if you constantly throw them out of your data set, you're blindsiding yourself and you're not doing a serious job scientifically. And it's not being fair to the people who you're writing articles for, who are sponsoring you. It's basically a type of fraud. I learned this by taking statistics courses outside of social sciences. I took them in other departments and it required a lot of math. And it was really challenging. And I didn't always do like super well in it like I was used to doing in other topics because it's hard. You had to do calculus over these distributions and that you came up with other statistical distributions, Jimmy, that were not bell curves. And so I went back to the sociology department and the people that did the stats there and said, why are we using a bell curve when there's about 10 other distributions that describe reality? And they don't look like bell curves. They're skewed this way, they're skewed that way. They look complex. And the answer was, it's the easiest to teach. That's scary. Generations of people in sociology and epidemiology and all these different sciences, even into the hard sciences, are always comparing every little thing to the bell curve. That describes some things, like tree heights, and it describes, insect populations some of the time, but it doesn't allow for chaotic dynamics that occasionally go into systems that throw everything for a loop. It can't describe systems that are built around fractal geometry, branching structures. It doesn't even describe music, which is built over something more fractal, called the 1/f spectra, which is a power law. There are these power laws. Basically, what that means is really small things can multiply by really big things like COVID did. There was a time I remember listening to a press conference from someone from one of the health agencies who said, well, it's only 60 people in the whole US. We've got it under control. It was an outlier. We can just start ignoring it. Sure. Look what happened. This is what happens when you ignore outliers. And all of these topics we're talking about that we're all interested here, the audience, and what we like to talk about and think about and read about, these are all things that are off of the bell curve. They're not described by a bell curve. And it's given scientists this feeling like they can ignore them to our peril.
Well, okay. So let's talk about the big one then. The big outlier, the one that science refuses to discuss or acknowledge. Consciousness. Consciousness. Physicists isn't going to talk to you about that. They can't. And anybody else, and especially when you jump into the atheist, right, non-spiritual world of chemistry and physics and quantum mechanics, astrophysics, you get into those worlds, and it's like they're waiting, or free will is the other one that cannot be discussed. But consciousness, that is the biggest outlier of them all, because it's an outlier in science. They don't want to discuss it, but it's the biggest chunk of the bell curve. It's the only part of a bell curve because we all have it. But yet, it's not talked about. It's crazy, isn't it?
Right. And it gives people what they feel is a reason to ignore all the non-local aspects of consciousness. We don't really understand the parameters of consciousness. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Are rocks conscious? Are so-called inanimate objects, do they have a type of consciousness too? But from those of us, who've studied remote viewing, this was an argument that was used against some of the best studies like that were done by Jessica Utz from UC Davis at the time for Congress to look at the 20-year government remote viewing program to decide if there were any results from the program that showed a positive effect. And she was able to show, just from a very limited number of studies, that people were able to describe, events and people in places at a distance, which shouldn't be any surprise to our audience here. But the arguments against it from people like Ray Hyman and others who were also, selected by Congress to look at some of the data were not that you didn't get these statistical correlations that showed an effect. What they said is, we don't understand why it works, and therefore it's not scientific. They're basically using any reason they can just to ignore it, even when you have a good data set And by now we have tons of data sets. People like Dean Radin, have written many books about. Dean goes study after study. From the last 100 years, they've gotten better, more controlled over the years. They're more finely structured than they were 100 years ago. And you've just got study after study that shows an effect, very statistically significant effect, that something is going on. From having been involved with this a long time, you can just see from the people in your class, they're able to draw those pictures a lot better than they should be if they're guessing. And yet, if we don't, the scientists say, well, we don't know why it works, so therefore that's not science. I mean, it's total poppycock. You have an effect there. It's incumbent upon you to come up with a new idea of why you get this in the data set. You can't just say no one taught this to me in college and say, okay, we can ignore it. So yeah, there are a lot of kind of reasons that people use to kind of just justify not looking into these effects. And they're there, and we should be looking into what is the signal line, what is this mysterious signal line, as Ingo Swann called it, below the surface. How is this communication working? What sort of exotic physics principles are at work here? It should.
Well, today, today I would argue that physics has given us that, and that's entanglement. And I really feel that answers, that checks so many boxes with the issues that we have. Faster than light travel, faster than light communication. Radio signals travel at a certain speed. How do we overcome communicating between planets and galaxies and star systems? How would ET do that? All the way down to things like remote viewing or telekinesis or telepathy or channeling, any of that. But the other part that addresses is that disturbance that Dean Radin talks about and has done so many studies on at the quantum level, where it is it's not a whole lot of disturbance happening in one burst with one particle. It's a lot of particles being disturbed very minutely. And you have to take that measurement. But when you go over so many trillions and trillions of particles that are being affected at the same time, that's when you get the causality. And I think Dean is right. But because physics has a hard time with measurement, right, and observation, they can't measure or observe consciousness. So therefore, it's not worth their time.
Well, so here's the thing about quantum entanglement. When I've talked to physicists about this, they always tell me that quantum entangled particles don't exchange information. It's purely a mathematical correlation. It's not like in real time they're communicating. And we do have good ways of getting measurements, in physics. It's just, how do we get the measurements of these sort of effects that we're looking at and experiences that people have, spontaneous RV experiences and so forth? I'm more likely to think it's something called the Aharonov-Bohm effect, and people can look that up. It's an exotic quantum effect that was discovered. Well, it was discovered in the 40s, but the engineers didn't know what it was, so they kind of didn't have any ideas. It was rediscovered in the 50s by Aharonov and Bohm. And that idea, it's a real mind blower, Jimmy. It's the idea that in a complete absence of an electromagnetic signal, you can get communications between particles, between systems. And this is sort of consistent with what we know from RV, because at one point they put people like Ingo Swann and his friend Hala Hamid in a submarine down below the Pacific just to test whether it was an electromagnetic signal. I know you and I don't think it is, but they didn't know back then in the 70s, and they wanted to do something that would shield all the electromagnetic signals like seawater. So they put them as deep as they could put them. And I think Hal Puthoff said it was one of the best sessions they ever did.
Right.
So what that led people to think is it's non-electromagnetic. And then sort of that leads you, what sort of effect is it? So my personal bias is more towards something like the AB effect, simply because we can connect the AB effect to communications in real time, and it's linked up to a lot of other interesting quantum effects. But nobody knows for sure. These are just ideas. We know there's an effect there, and I'm personally baffled why scientists are not more interested in pursuing, well, what idea would explain this, given that it really challenges the paradigms. I mean, I think I know the answer, Jimmy. And it's because mainstream academics don't like to take big risks. They're really thinking about tenure and promotion,
funding.
funding and awards. And basically, I mean, it's a little scary, the types of constraints that academics are under, especially since World War II, where everything became funded by these huge funding agencies. And I have to say one thing about this. Vannevar Bush, who's someone we heard could have been connected to MJ12 if those papers are real. He actually wrote a book about this where he was concerned that there was too much centralization in science. Vannevar Bush, the guy we think of as one of the bad guys that created, this compartmentalization of UFO information and so forth. He actually said he was concerned that there was too much centralization of science funding and that we needed citizen scientists, independent. All the way back in the 50s, he saw what was going on. And he was right. If it gets too centrally funded, no one wants to take risks. They're just really concerned about very, medium-term goals. And it doesn't advance our knowledge. I feel that's the state our society has been in since I've been alive, which is I haven't really seen the ball move down the field, I would say, very much in this area since the 90s, since I got involved with RV. It really hasn't been, it hasn't had the attention it deserves, and all these topics. And I think it's because these research organizations have become so concerned about funding and, fitting in, just like James Lukatsky found when he wrote that book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. They're out at Skinwalker Ranch. He's from DIA, former missile information analyst, looking at the signals from our adversaries' missiles and so forth. And he said in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, he went to the other intel agencies and he said, look, we found some really weird things going out there, including orbs, electromagnetic effects that we think would be interesting to other agencies. And what he was told by DHS is that would ruin our reputation. We are not going to help Dr. Lukatsky. Isn't that a shame? I mean,
it's crazy. Those are the outliers that we were talking about earlier.
Hello.
Yeah. And when and I hear this conversation a lot with mainstream scientists and physicists and chemists and so forth. They are so stuck in their lane that they believe their own dogma. And so that dogma is that every particle has a little nick of consciousness in it. And you lump enough of that together and you get consciousness. It springs to life. And that's what's going on with our brain. We've got enough mass in there that consciousness just comes out of it. Well, if that's the case, then they should be able to measure that. Yeah. They should be able to break down the chemistry. They should be able to get into the lab and find out when consciousness gets created and how much mass needs to be brought together, how many particles and molecules need to be combined, which ones go sentient, which ones don't. What's the difference of the consciousness of this guitar pick and the consciousness of a puppy and a human? You should be able to measure that. Or consciousness exists outside of the physical. It's you know what I mean? And if they would acknowledge that, then it's an easier thing for them to avoid. But if it exists in every single particle, then throw some science at it and tell us what's going on. It's really weird, and it's like they're a paradox of the paradox.
Right. Well, I'm sure you're aware that back in the Middle Ages, there was between the church and science at the time, where I think it was around the 1500s. where church said to the scientists, okay, we're going to leave you alone. This is like post Galileo or something like that. So we're going to leave you alone, but you leave the spirit to us and you can handle the physical stuff. And we're told that this separation between consciousness and physical science, has its roots back to this agreement, this deal, where scientists at the time were afraid for their lives. They didn't want to end up like Giordano Bruno,
Right.
burned at the stake in the town square for saying what he really thought, including that the universe was infinite and there might be animals and people on other planets and a host of other things that offended, the Christians at the time. But even Galileo, really a scientist, right? The guy that Galileo believed in measuring everything. I mean, he just was great at it. He creates a telescope, and he's put under house arrest, I think, for the final 10 or 20 years of his life.
Rest of his life.
I mean, quite a price to pay for. We should not take for granted what we can do right here, like right on the show right now, which is to say what we think. Because back then, just a few hundred years ago, people really had to fear for saying what was on their mind.
Yeah. You had to keep it inside your head.
Yeah, Copernicus did not even publish his books. He had them delayed until he was on his deathbed. Because
Isn't that crazy?
And we've fought for these freedoms for hundreds of years, and we have them now, for the most part. And
that's why I'm sorry that I interrupted you, but here's another thing that I say. It seems like I say it every single day, but like for me, true science. Physicists will say we've had real science for 400 years, and I'll argue that. I'll say that no, science ended 400 years ago. The last true scientist that we had was Newton. He was a religious scholar, right? He was a mathematician. He was a physicist. He was an alchemist.
Right? He wrote as many pages on alchemy as he did on gravity.
Yeah, and that's what allowed him to explore these ideas. He was an outlier, right?
Science, as we know it, has been censored because all of these pioneer scientists, Newton being, the bedrock of all of it, they were all into these, what we consider fringe topics, alternative topics. And one of the most gratifying things nowadays is to be looking into low energy nuclear reaction, what was called cold fusion a couple decades ago, that it creates nucleonic transmutation at an atomic level. And it literally verifies what Newton was saying. They probably didn't know about it back then. We don't know exactly what methods they were using, but all of these experiments up to the present day, thunderstorm generator, which has been making waves recently, Malcolm Bendel and others, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, if you follow their videos, and you can follow it on YouTube weekly, they're getting this alchemic transmutation from these Lena reactions where you end up with new elements within the reactor that weren't there when you started. And they have excellent electron microscopy photos and videos of this. So it looks like Newton was right about the alchemy too. Incredibly,
Yeah, there's and the idea. Let's stay on cold fusion for a second, or fusion. Let's just stay on fusion, just fusion, not fission, fusion. And so this is what I'm really confused about. It doesn't make any sense. Right now, our sun's core, which now I'm going to say allegedly because as far as I know, nobody's been there, but it's supposed to be 10 million degrees. Right. And what is happening right now at this stage of our sun, that fusion is happening, that conversion is happening at 10 million degrees. The fusion reactors right now, China's got one. There's one in the UK. The other day they achieved 45 seconds of more output than input. And these are big steps. But they are achieving 100 million degrees. That's their goal. Our sun isn't going to be 100 million degree centered sun for another 2.5 billion years. Again, allegedly. But when that happens, we can't be on this planet. We have to be gone. It's going to be a bad day in Big Rock. But why aren't we focusing fusion at a much simpler to achieve 10 million degrees? Why are we putting it so far out of reach at 100 million degrees? Why aren't we doing the same fusion reaction that our sun is doing right now?
Well, that's a good question, and I suspect I know the answer.
What's that?
Funding.
Yeah, funding.
I'm sorry. I've talked to people that have worked at the INEL reactor in southern Colorado, this test reactor. And I've heard funding stories about how they keep these projects going that really make my skin crawl. They're deliberately they're setting these projects up for maximum funding, not for maximum scientific benefit. So just like you're saying, they don't want a realistic goal, because if that was achieved, people might get bored with them and move on to other things. They always want to set a goal for hot fusion that's out of reach so that it fits their 10 or 20-year plan. I've talked to people that have worked within DOE, and I've been told that this plan for hot fusion, it's like a far out plan that goes out for decades. And this may be one of the reasons why so-called cold fusion, even though that's not literally what it is, but what we've called it, Fleischmann and Pons and so forth, because it's so inexpensive compared to these big funding projects, it would put you out of business. It would be like the Wright brothers compared to Samuel Piermont Langley at the time, 100 years ago, when the Wright brothers were doing this on their own funding. I mean, 2 high school dropouts, bicycle mechanics, self-fund their own airplane project. No one believes them. They think they're a bunch of hoaxers, flyers or liars. And Langley is the government-funded flyer got $100,000 grant, I believe, from the Department of Defense at the time. And the government was focusing on their big project. It had to be launched from a houseboat in the Potomac. It never worked. And yet these 2 guys from Ohio that no one ever heard from, who didn't even finish high school, make it work. This is what we're talking about, Jimmy, is the people that have invested in one direction. I mean, they want their projects to continue, and there's battles over limited amounts of funding. It has to do with telescopes. I read about this all the time in science. It's very competitive. So what ends up happening is the science suffers because no one's really taking the alternative seriously. I personally think you can create these fusion reactions, something very close to it, generate high, temperatures that can create energetic reactions from a quantum level, from these tabletop reactors like Fleischmann and Pons, developed at the University of Utah. But there was such a negative reaction to them from the scientific community, a completely ill-founded reaction that's more of, everyone knows what I'm talking about, it's more of a character attack than a serious scientific evaluation, right? And this is what we're dealing with here. We can see it right now in the UFO field. I don't think I have to go very far into this for you to know what I'm talking about. People come forward, credible witnesses. They say they've seen things. They say they know about the programs they're asking Congress to investigate. And you get all these ad hominem attacks, personal attacks on them personally, which the last time I checked is not part of the scientific method. So...
or is it? or is it? Well, because in its very fundamental form, even I don't have a bunch of fancy letters after my name, okay, but even I can grasp this idea. Hydrogen core surrounded by helium, pressure and heat. Right? That's all you need. And I would think that, get that to 10 million degrees, and then the conversion starts to happen and fusion takes off. It just seems so easy to me. We've got a lot of helium. We've got a lot of hydrogen, right? We've got ways to create pressure. We can create diamonds, right? We can create artificial diamonds with pressure. Why can't we apply these same fundamentals to achieve the way that our sun operates? It seems very easy to me.
I'll tell you one of the things, Jimmy, though. No, what both hot fusion and Leonard are dealing with is once you get this reaction going, it's really strong and it's very hard to confine the reaction. In hot fusion, you have these magnetic confinement fields. If you've seen what those reactors look like, there's something out of a Theodore Geiger painting.
Yeah, it is. It is 100%.
Yeah, so that reaction, it's so hot and it wants to escape and burn a hole in your reactor, and you have to generate these increasingly crazy strong magnetic fields. But it's been found from the Leonard research all the way from labs here in the US, Russia, Japan, other places, is that at a very, very tiny scale, you're generating magnetic fields that are even stronger than the hot fusion reactors, and they're self-confined by the reaction itself. It's confined within the space of an atom. And that's what we're looking at. And so you're absolutely right. It has to do with compression. Jimmy, it's like a runaway reaction. Once you get that compression going, you've created a little quantum monster, okay? And it wants to start moving around and engaging other things. By the way, this is the same problem with quantum computers. If you've talked to those people, is your collection of particles do not want to stay isolated. They want to cohere and interact with everything, including the walls of the room. And once that starts to happen, in quantum computers, you get decoherence, the reaction collapses. This is why quantum computers are still challenging, is you can't sustain the reaction for long enough before the whole system decoheres. But in hot fusion, you had the magnetic confinement fields fail. And in cold fusion, what they found, we talked about alchemy, the nucleonic transmutation. You start transmuting the elements in the reactor, and it's hard to keep it under control. I think the person who's done it the longest was Alexander Parkhomov from Russia with his 225-day reactor. He said he got his cold fusion reaction going for 225 days. Now, Google recently tried to replicate the Parkhomov 225-day tabletop reactor, and they couldn't do it because they didn't replicate his reactor as closely as it should be. These cold fusion Leonard reactions are really finicky. They need a certain amount of impurities in the materials. They need to have kind of fissures for the particles to compact into. The grain size matters. And so if you don't get that all just right, you have to have a lot of patience with this. And a lot of people don't have that type of patience to get the reaction going. We were told by someone named Dr. Vittorio Violante from Italy's ENEA, their top energy research facility in Italy. He said they got the reaction going, this tabletop cold Leonard reaction, but it could take weeks to get it to self-sustain. Weeks. So you have to have a lot of patience. You really have to know it's just beyond the capacity of some of these more bureaucratic organizations and their committee meetings and their really tight schedules and their impatience.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the thing that is difficult for us to overcome is mass and gravity, which our sun has a lot of both, which creates the pressure for the fusion. And that's why it takes so long for the particles to come out through as energy to us. That's a long travel. It's a long life to make it to the surface of the sun and make it out here so we can warm this planet and grow really good weed. That's a long process. And so to replicate that is tough. I get it, but if the principles are there and they're that basic, we should be able to overcome it at a much smaller scale. And there's another piece of this to me, which actually just left my head. Wow, that was weird. Like a photon. Like a photon. It just left me, which is doesn't matter. Okay, moving on.
I want to say one thing, Jimmy. There's a lot of reasons to feel optimistic about all this, because I can tell you that a lot of really sharp minds are working on what we're talking about right here. They're working on it every day, and I'm seeing the results from some of these experiments, and they're making a lot of progress. So my feeling about the entire lack of a paradigm shift that we've been experiencing since the 90s, that we all thought was about to happen next year. You know, I went to so many conferences back in the 90s, like, it's just next year we're going to get this big break. I think it's like a rubber band effect. The farther you pull back the rubber band, the harder it's going to snap forward into the future. And I've seen the rubber band pulling back, and this recent denial from the so-called Arrow organization within the Pentagon. Yeah, that's what O stands for, organization. Their total denial of the UFO issue, I mean, even worse than Project Blue Book, leads me to think that that rubber band is going to snap pretty hard when we reach a sort of critical mass with evidence.
Let's circle back to Arrow. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember what it was now.
Go ahead.
It's this, when we're talking about mass and gravity, there's those three forces: gravity, both versions of it, right? Positive and negative, and the strong and weak forces. That if these particles bind and exist for trillions and trillions of years, technically forever. We don't know when the end times happen with this, but they do it without eating, right? The energy exists. And it's the strongest forces that we can't explain and don't have any answers to. It's crazy. We haven't moved any further with gravity than Newton's equations. We're still there, man. That's exactly where we were 400 years ago. And why not understand those forces and get to those energies?
I think it's really the vested interests around us that don't feel like it's to their advantage to go into this direction. I mean, ever since the 1950s, we've had a very strong, well, end of World War II, really, very strong national security state in the US. There's something called the National Security Order, which is if you invent something that the government feels could affect national security, could end up in the hands of our adversaries, something like that, they are legally entitled to come to your home, confiscate the equipment, the stuff, and slap a no-talk order on you. You can't even say that they visited to apply this. And this also applies from the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, Section 51, that says anything that's even remotely radioactive, the DOE can come in and say it's dangerous, it's radioactive. People think this has been applied to UFO crash recoveries and so forth, to allow them to do something similar to a national security order, which is to basically confiscate the material and prevent you from, you know, talking about it, exploring what the ramifications are and so forth. Well, anyway, my view as a sociologist is that's put a real damper probably on a lot of experiments and people that have gotten close to this, because the people that we know about that went in this direction, there was a guy, Winston Bostic, funded by DOE in the 50s, that was doing stuff very similar to John Hutchison from Canada. The fractured metal samples at room temperature, the embedded objects in the metals, room temperature, quantum effects. Bostic was looking at ways, I think it was called Project Sherwood, to find peaceful uses of atomic weapons, of nuclear energy for, and he created things that he called plasmoids, and things that looked like he thought these looked like galaxies. The New York Times article said it was galaxies in the test tube. So if you're funded by the big organizations, you can move in that direction and make real progress. It just seems that they really won't let that happen if you get too close to discovering this and it's not under, it's not under their control. So I think there's reasons why we haven't made a huge amount of progress. I think the people who have have been basically censored. That's what I think's been going on.
Yeah, Hutchison was. I thought for a minute there was a couple of years there. Man, those were crazy times when he was doing his thing. I thought there was a couple of years there that something was about to bust loose, and he was going to force it. And then I had another. I was watching one of his experiments. I was watching him and in his apartment doing his thing, and I had this weird thought. What would it be like to live next door to that guy? What kind of sounds were coming through the walls of that apartment? Flying bowling balls, watching your lights dim.
Yeah, and he even said he had time loss.
Yeah.
So you would be. So this is the interesting thing to me, Jimmy, is a lot of this parallels people's experience around UFOs, orbs, and cryptids. That type of time loss experience where a couple hours gone by and you can't account for them, and you might even be standing in the same position you were 5 hours ago, and you don't even feel sore. It's just like the space-time metric changed in some way, and you've moved forward. It's really strange. That's one of the things you would experience as one of his neighbors, in addition to your cameras and batteries going on the fritz and lights dimming. But people have replicated the Hutchison effect, and the people that have looked into it, Ken Shoulders, who worked at SRI, one of Hal Puthoff's colleagues for a time, were sent to investigate, John. And they concluded it was real. And they came up with this idea, like you're saying, the compression idea that you mentioned. That really seems to be the basis of it. And by the way, you can even trace that from Newton. Because if you use Newton's equations, like there was a physicist from the 1800s, Wilhelm Weber, who worked with Gauss to invent the telegraph and so forth. He even argued back in the 1840s, like hundreds of years ago, that if particles got really, really close together, the repulsive forces would fade and you'd get this super attractive force based on Newton's third law, by the way. And it would create negative inertial mass. This is like a negative mass is like something totally far into what we're used to experiencing. It related to superconductivity and space-time metric engineering. And someone from the 1840s already thought of it based just simply on Newton's gravitational laws. So, people have been working on this, and that really seems to be one of the real secrets to all of this, is a real type of compression that other forces take over. You move in the direction of superconductivity and exotic vacuum objects and sort of other exotic effects that would really change how we live, how we use energy, the constraints on us right now. Some of those with
yesterday there was a press release that came out. Now I caught it. I did it on the news. And I want to thank Renee Newman, my news producer, for catching this. There was an announcement yesterday. Now, I'll send you the information. I have it. Well, hold on a minute. Hold on. Let's see how easy I can pull it up here. What was the date yesterday? Yesterday was April 9th, right? Right. Okay, so let's go.
I just want to say one thing here while you're looking for that. I see in the comments, Stacy F said sound cavitation. Sound cavitation, right on. You can create all these effects from sound, ionic, acoustic waves. There's all sorts of things from sound cavitation that can create these exotic effects too. You don't just need
that was a big part of Hutchison's work too, as well.
Right.
Okay, you ready? Here, or was it from? Wait a minute. Today's Wednesday, right? Yeah, I did this. Yesterday's the 9th. Okay, I might have. Hold on a minute. Okay, let's go to April 8th. This press release is about this, that April 8th, about room temperature transitions, and they in the study, in the test, maybe this was announced on Monday. Okay, I can't find it. Anyway, they converted a non-magnetic material, which in this case was a gemstone, to magnetic.
Right.
And they did it, which now, when you think of the implications, I cannot. All right, I have. I just reported it. I'm reading over it, and I'm not going to spend time on it. Anyway, so that was the point.
Yeah, no, that's one of the effects of orbs and ball lightning is to magnetization of non-magnetic materials. I'm just reading about this yesterday from a Russian researcher, Shak Paranov. I am Shak Paranov. That's one of his conclusions from artificially generated ball lightning is you can create magnetization of materials that are not magnetic. I mean, think about that.
That's a heavy. That's a big jump. We're gonna take a break here right now, but I was talking about this earlier this week. In that, in my opinion, now this is just me, all right, but all of our advancements in our evolution are dealt with in our 3D world with particles and atoms and molecules, things that we can touch, right? Making things faster, smaller, right? Okay, I get that, right? And those are our leap, but we've taken things as far as we can in this version of our world. The next step in evolution, the big jump, is going to be the stuff that we can't touch or see. And that is going to be, consciousness, the understanding of that, and what drives it. Because I'm serious. The gift from E.T., when E.T. gets here, it's not going to be something that we understand. I think E.T. is going to go, no, man. We gave up on math like 1 billion years ago. Right? Yeah, it worked for us for a minute, but now it's all about this, and it's going to freak us out. But that's our next step in evolution is getting to that.
Right. So, Jimmy, I would just argue there's one stage between the solid physical stuff we see around us and just consciousness. It's coherent matter. That is the next stage of matter. Plasmas are past. Fluorescent bulbs and auroras and lightning, they're one step past this solid stuff around us, right? And the next step, plasmas are by far the most abundant type of matter in the universe by a long shot, by like 99.9%. Plasmas, all those glowing nebulae. There's another phase of matter past there, which we see on Earth, coherent matter. Orbs, ball lightning, coherent sound, things like lasers. That is to actually manipulate matter to turn it into a coherent form, which is what linear cold fusion is. A lot of people think that's what it is. That's the next step on the way in our evolution of technology and how we relate to nature, since all of these things are natural anyway.
Do you think that there's a possibility that this will interfere with Einstein's equations and certainly mass, energy, and the speed of light? Because to understand it, would it push us past what we count on today as these basic laws?
Right. What we think of as Einstein's basic laws, again, it's partly political sociology. What we've selected out of Einstein, what he was given a Nobel Prize for. But he was the one who suggested a variable speed of light in 1907 because he felt that the gravitational mass of the universe should affect the speed of light as light moves around the universe and it moves towards massive objects. So in two papers, 1907, 1911, he argued for a variable speed of light, which is entirely consistent with the idea of space-time metric engineering, which a lot of folks at OSAP ATIP think is one of the secrets to how UFO technologies work, is they're deliberately interacting with the quantum field by altering the metric of space and time using, metamaterials. And literally, just like you're saying, changing the speed of light. So I think it's consistent with one of Einstein's ideas. It's just one of the ideas that we forgot, but it might have been his best idea, is that, because speed of light's based on two physics ideas, permittivity, permeability, electrical constant, magnetic constant. They've been set at 1 for 100 years. I mean, we know they vary in materials, but in the vacuum, they're considered 1. But let's say there's variable permittivity, oscillating permittivity. Things like that look blurry. We know the paranormal types of objects and creatures and things that you have look blurry because of their permittivity, oscillation. Orbs, ball lightning, they always look kind of a little blurry, not as defined as these sorts of things. I think it's consistent with Einstein's ideas, actually, because it's just a part of Einstein we haven't talked about very, very much. But you can't have space-time metric engineering without a variable speed of light, and Einstein was comfortable with that.
And isn't it interesting, and I do have to get to the break.
Yes.
Isn't it interesting how the speed of light constant is defined, and in order to make all of the math work?
Right.
That's the only reason. And so nobody wants to talk about a variable speed of light, or that the speed of light could be different in different situations. No. It's this, because none of the equations work. And then the math goes off. All of it. Right? I mean, that's not a little bit, all of it. So therefore, they don't even like discussing it. But Einstein, remember during the eclipse, when he pulls off some old theories off the shelf that weren't even his, he thinks about it a little bit. He's like, light should, when it goes there, it should be able to bend around a mass.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now this is in his head. He had nothing to base it on, right? There was no laboratory test, but he wrote it out and proposed it. Then the eclipse happened. And what would they do? They photographed it, and they photographed
South Africa or somewhere like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Photographed stars behind the sun.
Perihelion of Mercury.
Yeah. It was great. It was awesome.
It's so amazing what you're saying, because he just saw it as an idea. You're absolutely right. He had no data.
None.
Everyone says, well, science is only data. Well, Einstein worked off of thought experiments, okay? Everything with Einstein was simple thought, just like you're saying.
Yeah. I love that part of it. And that's why, that's the outliers, man. That's the outliers. There's no data there. There's no data. Let's take our break. Let's get our break in. Dr. Simeon Hein is with us. I told you it's going to be a whole night about fun and science and getting our knowledge on. We'll be right back after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to JimmyChurchRadio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 t-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black t-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture. Send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black t-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping. And you're going to get a tracking number. And with a Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein is with us. We're talking science, physics. We didn't get into the multiverse. Well, we didn't do that yet, but we're going to jump into all of those things now in this next segment. And we didn't talk music or guitars, and we're not going to do that now. By the way, we're not going to do it. Not going to do it. The ideas that were ignored in the Arrow report that was penned by Sean Kirkpatrick. I don't think it was a team at Arrow. I don't think it's an Arrow report. Nobody signed it, by the way. There was no attributes to that report. But I think it was just the mind of Sean Kirkpatrick. But what was ignored there were the vast amounts of military sightings that have gone on back to Project Sign. You can go back to from 1945 forward. All of that was ignored. And then the other part that was ignored were the eyewitnesses like myself, of which there are every country on the planet. Every country has got their own UFO sightings and reports compiled, all ignored by Arrow. But the idea that I have here is, I think, the biggest question of all. What is it that we are seeing, and how is it getting done? Right? How is it getting here? Is it difficult? Is it easy? What are the processes? Because of the amount of life that is out there in the universe, they all have their different ways of getting it done. And do you have any ideas on how that travel is accomplished, and the distances of space and time are overcome? Because the universe is a pretty damn big place.
Right. So first about Arrow, I mean, I think it unfortunately it was a typical government report by someone who said he'd rather this be an SEP, someone else's problem. And I thought that was sort of like a piss poor attitude for such an important subject, right? Because it did not deal with these cases we know about, and didn't even deal with recent cases like the USS Nimitz encounter in 2004. Are you really telling us that that has just a very ordinary explanation, the tic tac, something that Kevin Day said went from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I talked to him. I mean, what technology does this, Sean? Okay, are you really saying this is our technology, or if our adversaries have this, well, we might as well surrender right now, because that is really darn fast to be able to move like that. Arrow did such a superficial job on these. I don't think we need to say much more about it. Even the people that spoke to Arrow, like former missile security missile launch officer David Chindelli, who was at the citizen hearing, by the way, in 2013 at the National Press Club, which was like a 5-day event. And he taught on one of these recent podcasts, he said what it was like to talk to Arrow. And he said, I don't recommend anyone else talk to Arrow. They did not ask any serious questions. They weren't curious about what was hovering over his missile launch silo, why the 10 missiles went down in sequence, why the security guards were terrified. They didn't want to hear any of that. They just said, okay, what was the color? No, it was just ridiculous. And I think it was more of a type of psyop than it is. Even Blue Book did a better job. They had people answering phones there. So, okay. We need something more than Arrow, as you said, Jimmy, going back to 30s or 45, whenever this all starts, to look at these cases. If you think you can explain it away, I'm all ears on some of these stranger cases. But propulsion systems, well, from my understanding, having talked to engineers that have been asked to look at these materials, I've spoken to 3 or so who've handled these materials, whose teams of aerospace researchers and others at major companies, they've been told, we have this material, whoever made it went away, can you figure out how it works? And I've been told in every case that it is like 1,000 years ahead of our technology in terms of the way that this material integrates with the electromagnetic field and the quantum vacuum field. So it literally seems like a type of quantum engineering from what I'm told. The material is so finely engineered down to individual atoms, something that we're not capable of right now, in a technological way, in a structure with little shapes and patterns in there. It's small enough, going past 2 nanometers, which is what we are, I think that's the limit of what we can manufacture with, chips and so forth. way down to this quantum level of engineering that it interacts directly with the quantum vacuum. And it's able to make the vacuum field thinner ahead of the craft and denser behind it. So it sort of moves like a hockey puck on ice. It's moving because space-time's sort of parting in front of it, and it's getting denser behind it, so it just naturally moves, just as if you pushed on an object, it's going to move. But what's pushing is the quantum vacuum field. That's how I'm told it could work. But the people that looked at it told me it was so far advanced, there is no way that it was produced here. It's from somewhere else. Even the isotopic ratios are not what we find on Earth for normal elements in the periodic table. So it seems to be beyond propulsion. It seems to work directly with the structure of space and time and to engineer that, which is why when we see them, they always seem blurry and off, and it's something about them is sort of strange looking because they're in a different space-time reference than we are. From
Yeah.
what I've been told.
Yeah. I think that's another reason why conventional ways of searching for, and that includes the James Webb Space Telescope, some analog way of looking for something, or even signals, searching for signals, that we are looking for something that may not live in our time scale. That's it.
Right,
That's it.
right.
It's out of focus. It's not visible,
Yep.
and we, as Earthlings, we are in a certain frequency range. That's it. Our radio signals, our television signals, our digital signals, the way our electricity operates here. We can't assume that those principles apply to the rest of the universe and that another civilization is going to operate the same way. And therefore, and I'm not saying SETI is a waste of time or the James Webb Space Telescope is a waste. I'm not suggesting that. But looking for something physically, the way that we see ourselves, and we don't have another way to understand that. I get that. We don't. But that may be why we miss everything. And that would certainly explain why things just appear and disappear in the sky. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. Doesn't make any sense. It appears and then leaves for a brief moment. And I don't understand that. But going back to staying on this, if we look at something as simple as the Dune series of books, right? And the bending of space. Now, that's science fiction, and it's presented that way. It's very creative, and it's well done. But those ideas apply to what you're saying right there, right? That we instead of this linear travel in one direction, like we're driving a car down a road, is not how it's getting done. It's getting done in another way. And distances are not an issue. Time is not an issue, right?
Right. No, that's correct. That's from everyone I've talked to, and these folks have not gone public for the most part. I had one aerospace engineer who I wrote about in Black Swan Ghosts, who was, he was comfortable telling me his story. And he said, I don't care about my security clearances anymore. I'm just going to tell you how this works, how they farm out these materials and how they, who gets it. And, he even told me what his budget was. It was huge to try to figure out how this stuff works. And he told me what other people have told me. They couldn't figure it out. It was too far advanced. But yeah, it's something like that, Jimmy. We're used to thinking that everything is going to meet us in this particular space-time construct. But I think, any human knows when you go to sleep at night and you dream, that sort of happens in a different sort of time. You guess if you're just a pure physicalist, you could say that's just the brain's random electrical firings. But I don't believe that. I've had dreams that seemed very accurate and really fit what was going on in my life at the time, but just like it gave me more information about it. So I would argue we actually do experience that state sometimes, maybe in hypnosis, occasionally, but we always come back to this sort of main conscious state. We're comfortable because it feels like something we're familiar with. And I think that may be one of the main challenges of dealing with these visitors, if they're ETs, or if they come from other dimensions. You mentioned the multiverse. This is a big candidate for where they're coming from. They're in the space we're in here, all of us, wherever you are, but they're in a different part of it, so we don't interact with them directly. Kind of, you could make the same argument for dark matter, that it's in the space we're in. It's the vast type of matter, the main type of matter in the universe, but we never see it. These beings could be, I think I like to use the radio analogy. They're on the dial. They're at one frequency, we're at another. And just like FM radio, they normally don't mix. They're not like AM radio anymore. You don't get this interference between two frequencies. That's why FM was invented, to have the capture effect, right? The capture effect keeps each station separate from the next. You don't get that bleed through. It seems like it's mostly like that, with some bleed through some of the time. And I think it has to do with us too. I mean, this is why people at night experience these visitors in their homes and their bedrooms, and sometimes, without consciously wanting it to happen, they see these things when they're sort of in that semi-dream state. I think that's when your conscious apparatus, your brain, is sort of modulating its frequencies. I mean, we know you go from that beta state to the delta state, the theta state. You can monitor your sleep now with different devices that are already built into your phone and so forth. When you're kind of going through that modulation, my feeling about it is, this is just my idea, you're kind of more open to these other stations that you've been taught to tune out. Just like we were saying at the beginning of the show, since you were a little kid, you've been told, tune all that out, just focus on what we tell you to focus on. Well, those stations are there, and I don't think they can actually always get through unless we're a little more open to it. So that's another possibility, apart from this exotic quantum technology, which I'm told is at least 1,000 years ahead of us, is that some of them could be indigenous to the Earth, but at another frequency, and we just don't encounter them very often. I mean, it seems to be what people experience. So,
well, I explain it this way. I want your reaction to this, but this is how my twisted mind works. Tonight, after the show, Dr. Simeon Hein decides that he wants a double cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate shake from his favorite burger stand that's open 24 hours, and it's 20 miles away. So, not a big deal. It's just what he wants to do. So he jumps in his car, drives 20 miles. He's back at home with his favorite burger, ice cold chocolate shake, fries, and you do it because you want to, because it's easy. But if you suggested that 200 years ago, right, that we're just going to drive 20 miles and we're going to be back here in 30 minutes with food at midnight, right? That's black magic voodoo stuff. Today we laugh at that. That's what ET does. It's just a place to go, right? It's easy to do. Yeah, man, let's go to Earth tonight. All right, when? Let's go right now. Let's just go check it out. We can be back in a half hour, right? That's it. We would have difficulty in digesting that and how they get it done, and we would look at it as science fiction, like black magic voodoo. But to ET, it's the same thing as driving to a 24-hour drive-through. It's really that simple.
Certainly. And I mean, even how we're communicating right now, Jimmy, this would have seemed like magic. This could have gotten us burned at the stake a couple hundred
100%.
years ago. This would have seemed like witchcraft. Just to people in our own country, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, this would have seen something like what they would have thought witches would do. And so, yeah, times change and our thinking changes. I think it's always helpful to look back at the past, at the things people were super, skeptical about at the time, like manned flight, airplanes, and electricity, and just about anything else you can think of. Meteorites were considered fake in the 1800s. They were considered impossible because Aristotle said there's nothing moving beyond the moon. It's impossible for stones to fall. I mean, the things
now I have one sitting next to me.
Okay, those were all thrown away from European museums because the French Academy of Sciences had a meeting and they decided it was just volcano stones. They were not coming from outer space until there was a huge fall of meteorites sometime around 1804 in Eagle, France, and they couldn't deny it anymore. There's too many came down, and they were an elliptical pattern. It fit the idea of something coming through. But you get what I'm saying, is if you look at what people were skeptical of in the past or scoffing at, which is basically everything that we accept now as part of modern reality. Would you have thought when you and I were kids, we'd be walking around with these little tricorder like phones from Star Trek? So things change, and what seems like magic one day is kind of science and technology a couple decades later. And boy, does it change quickly. It changes in our lifetime. So if you just extrapolate, kind of like you're suggesting right now, Jimmy, if you extrapolate that out a couple decades or a couple centuries, we would be right where we think ETs are now, cruising around in these ships with our space-time metric engineering, going from here to Alpha Centauri and back in an afternoon. Why not?
And let me ask you this, since we were talking about space-time. And I do want to get back to Black Swan a little bit. All of Simeon's books, you can go to mountbaldy.com. The links are below over on our website and on social media too as well. Is this all of our science fiction, books, movies, TV series, when we're going out there, they ignore something. And that is this. If you're going to warp drive to another star system and then warp drive back to Earth, nobody discusses the time dilation that goes down.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you come back to Earth after doing that, you're 10,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
And your family is dead.
Pretty lonely, huh?
Yeah.
Everybody you knew is gone. You're right.
Nobody talks about that part of it unless they're, okay, Captain, we're going back to Earth. We need to reverse time on the way back. Give me a little of that, right? So you don't ignore these basic principles that Einstein taught us.
Right. Yeah, you do get this space-time dilation. These Lorentz, it was from Lorentz who created these dilation effect ideas. He was the one that realized it would happen. And it happens with electromagnetic signals too. It just so happens that light's electromagnetic. So it applies to light and applies to anything that's going close to the speed of light. Yeah. The time dilation, you wouldn't come back to the same Earth you left if you were going at speeds. Now, if you do it the way ET does it, and you're sort of slipping sideways through space-time, you might not get that space-time dilation effect.
That's the bingo. That's exactly where exactly where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Because if it's that easy for ET, like taking a step, right? That's it. You're just stepping from one spot to the other. You're not traveling, right? You're not overcome. You're not doing that. So, and relativity, which, when you look at it in its basic form, it's the observation of two things, and it's different, how time is captured and observed. Okay. So when you look at relativity, I get that and I understand it. But if you overcome that and there's no speed, there's no velocity, there's no mass involved. If you take all of that off of the table, then time isn't an issue, is it? So you can come back and your relatives are, your dog is still alive.
Right. It'd be more like tuning to a different frequency, experiencing that station, then tuning back to the frequency you were originally at. You didn't annihilate it because you weren't traveling physically at high speeds near sea. So yeah,
and going back to the Nimitz, the idea of in our level of understanding, something going from 80,000 feet to sea level in under a second would create a huge seismic event. You are disturbing all of the atmosphere and then stopping. It seems like we should have had a tsunami, right? On the coast.
No, it's a very good point because people have attempted to calculate how much of the Earth's electrical production that would take to move that quickly from that height down to sea level and then stop on a dime. It was like a big chunks of the Earth's electrical output at that moment. It would be a huge energetic event. It would create sonic booms.
Yes.
It would create, the water would be parting from the energy field. And who would be able to survive G-forces like that if there were biological entities in there? Yeah, Arrow, how do you explain that one? And that's on radar. It's no wonder they took all the radar tapes. And from the Hawkeye, was it the 3C Hawkeye plane? We were told by some other folks that were there on the Princeton, I believe, that the hard drives, the so-called bricks, were confiscated as soon as the planes landed that had the sensor data, because apparently that Tic Tac pulled alongside one of the other planes up there. So, I mean, they confiscate the data and then say, what are they going to say next? It never happened. This is like newspeak, like Orwell. It's just all a fiction. It was something on social media. It didn't really happen. That's what we're going to be told next.
Have you
it's a good point, Jimmy. It's how that. And it raises so many questions. And that's what I would like to see is, why don't we have an open discussion of the Tic Tac? It would inspire little kids' minds and get us curious, just like Star Trek got all of us curious back in the day in the late 60s,
Well, what's more dangerous in the way that Kirkpatrick and Arrow chose to ignore the Nimitz? Now, I don't know the true events. We have the facts of the Nimitz, and then we have the truth, right? And the truth is somewhere out there. I don't know what it is. I don't know. But here's the scary part. We need it to be ET. We have to. It has to be ET, because if it's us, if our technology, the United States, has that, and it is not being shared with humanity, that's going to piss a lot of people off, and you got a big problem. And if it's
Jimmy, I am told that's a big part of it.
It is a big part of it.
This might be the main reason why we're not having a national conversation. Because the powers that be that run our military and security apparatus are really gravely afraid of other countries getting this before we do. We know, you mentioned this right at the beginning of the show. Other countries have their own programs. They've had programs in remote viewing. Soviet Union, China, many organizations in those countries studying remote viewing, what they called psychotronics, a kind of weaponization of psychic functioning. And we're told that China has many UFO research institutes, as do many other countries, right? So I think that, I don't know if this is true, but I have been told by people who seem to know what they're talking about that this is one of the main obstacles right now to, the silence is a bit deafening right now. I know that Congress has been briefed on this since 2017 in classified hearings in SCIFs, okay? Since that big New York Times article. This has been something that Congress has been hearing about. We can only guess what they've been shown, since it's classified hearings and they're allowed to see stuff that the public isn't. But this is really the issue, is they may feel that it has such big military implications, whoever can create their own Tic Tacs first, right? I mean, this is way beyond any hypersonic missiles or anything like this. This is something really, really fast. Whoever has that really dominates the air and space. So this could be the reason. I don't know if this is the only reason, but it could be a main reason why this is not more open to public discussion, because I feel like the public deserves to hear this discussion, because we've been living with this for at least 70 years. A lot of people experience this. They feel that there's a stigma attached to talking about it openly. There could be repercussions on their career if they say what they've seen, especially people, pilots, but even first responders. How often do you hear when there's a UFO sighting that they'll say, we're not going to talk about this? So people, professionals that respond to these areas where these sightings happen. So this is, I don't see how our society can grow unless we engage in this discussion in an adult, educated, structured way that allows us to ask questions and talk about it, because we've been living under this sort of blanket of repression of this information because people are afraid to be ridiculed by their neighbors and even in their families. I've been told by people that this affected their relationship with other family members, just talking about their UFO sightings or their cryptid sightings and so forth. So we need this to grow as a country. And everyone knows who's listening to this that this is true, right? It's really been held back for decades now. And it's only going to help our science and our understanding of the universe. I mean, we're launching these expensive, cool telescopes, James Webb telescopes, others, these are great, but we need some discussion to go along with that.
Yeah. Has the government painted themselves into a corner, right? Where they don't have an out now, no matter what the knowledge may be, right? They've painted themselves into a corner because, like I said, we need the Tic Tac to be ET, because if it's reverse engineered technology in possession of one of our adversaries, that would freak out the planet. And that's what I'm saying. The government's painted themselves into a corner.
That is such a good point, because didn't the Arrow people say, was it our friend Sean Kirkpatrick or someone else say, I'd rather this be ET than our adversaries, because at least, I'll sleep better knowing it's not our adversaries having this technology. I think we have a lot of technology that hasn't been disclosed that has a lot to do with the Cold War and so forth. We haven't heard, the full extent of that conversation. But yeah, I mean, is it ET? Is it other, Jimmy, you're familiar with all the other ideas, the so-called ultra-terrestrials. I mean, other beings that live here, we just assume we're the only ones around because we don't see them very often. Maybe someone else lives here. They've been here longer than we do. Maybe we're not that relevant to them. And they live, I don't know, under the oceans or somewhere, and they just don't come out all that much. And that's what we're seeing. It could be something terrestrial. We really don't know. But whatever the technology is, it's quite advanced. And here's one thing I want to mention. You mentioned consciousness in the previous hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was talking to Jacques Vallée once, he felt that this was a big area of UFO ET research that's been suppressed by the UFO community, which is and this was one of the IRVA meetings, International Remote Viewing Association meetings in Vegas. And I was just talking with him. He was one of the presenters. And he said that from his experience, people who've had contact sightings of UFOs or the inhabitants have these precognitive experiences before the UFO shows up or before the visitors show up. And they have something that remains afterwards, like they have extended psychic ability. So there's a component to it. And this sort of would make sense that it's somehow altering the space-time continuum in some way that connects us in new ways to things around us that go beyond ordinary consciousness.
Well, he's been talking about that, as you know, for 50 years. And he's been trying to, Jacques, I know pretty well. Okay. Pretty well. I just spent I just had a long, lengthy conversation with him last week. And, but anyway, he has been trying to get this understood, which, yes, there is the nuts and bolts version of this. Of course, there's lots of versions of it. But there's another version of it that is beyond our understanding. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we feel it, sometimes we smell it, but it's not the physical that we think it is. And I think he's onto something. And the reason why is there has to be, Simeon, I don't know what the number is, but there has to be nearly an infinite amount of intelligent civilizations in the universe. Infinite. It's a number so big we can't comprehend it, that's for sure. And so if we look at it that way, how many advanced civilizations are aware of their neighborhood? And in this case, let's say the Milky Way and planet Earth. I would say, man, that's a big number. It's a big number. And they're out visiting other planets too. Right? The Earth isn't the center of the universe. It's not the most important planet here. There are other ones that are probably a lot cooler and more fun. And that's it. So maybe they just visit once and they move on. Right? And that's why we don't see the same ships. We don't see the same types of beings. We don't have a repeat of experiences. Sometimes we do. But we have to look at it that way. It becomes a numbers issue, probability, statistics, and those numbers are really, 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 really big, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really big. And every time we get these new photos back from what used to be Hubble and now James Webb, you realize how big it's immense. And I think, it's our collective ego that wants to make it small because, we're mammals and we like to feel like, we're the head honchos in our neighborhood, but maybe we aren't. And maybe we're sharing it with other folks and they sort of understand how we react. So they kind of keep a distance. The reason why I do think there's an extraterrestrial component to it, it's not just what experiencers have told us who feel they've been aboard these craft and what they've seen, the symbols and the shapes and the controls and so forth. It's the isotopic analysis of the elements in those materials, whether it's from crash materials or from some of these implants. You remember the late Dr. Roger Lear, who did this implant removal? I had a chance to talk to him. He was at Citizen Hearing in 2013. He passed on not too long after that. And we were having this conversation and he goes, when we are looking at some of these materials that we've removed from people, the isotopic ratios are in these materials are not what we find on Earth. You couldn't make them. That's what everyone says, but it'd be really expensive just to manufacture even a tiny amount of it. It would be very time consuming. But he says, it appears that this is what Roger told me. He said, it looks like these civilizations might be 1 million years or more advanced than we are from the materials and how far away in the universe they'd have to be from us. That's because they're looking at these materials and saying, well, those isotopic ratios come from a certain time period in the universe when they were being made by stars and so forth. It might have been millions and millions of years ago, 1 billion years ago or something. And that's how they get an estimate of how old these civilizations are. It was his way of thinking about it. So that is something, if you really want to stretch your mind a little bit, think of a civilization that's like 1 million years more advanced. How would we would be like sub-kindergarten to them in terms of their level of abilities, right? If they're able to get...
We would be bacteria.
Bacteria. We'd be like...
literally bacteria. Single-celled... Right. I mean, I don't find comfort in that, but you have to accept your place sometimes where now, if you go back to 1995, 1992, the idea of what was thought to be the first exoplanet was discovered, 1992, right? 1995, it's confirmed, right? 1998, 5 5 exoplanets, 1998. We're only in 2024. But what has changed between then and now, and back to statistics, right? We now know as fact that every single star has every single star has at least one planet. Every one. That's a lot of stars. That's a lot of stars just in our Milky Way. So it becomes this, now it's a numbers game, isn't it? Where we were wondering, just in 1990 AOL, right? We're talking about America Online. 1995, we were still wondering if there were other planets outside of our star system. That's so modern. That's a generation. That's just yesterday. That's last week, and where it has changed today. So yeah, it's mind blowing. That's why the James Webb, I think, is so important, that we are able to, with the technology that we have, is not only observe these exoplanets but analyze their atmosphere. I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy that is where we are at today. But we're still bugs, right? We're still just like nothing compared to anything that would have developed their civilization 1,000 years before our planet was formed. That's it. Just 1,000 years. Yeah, it's man.
And if they've lasted that long, they haven't destroyed themselves yet. Like we're always getting to this brink of global destruction. We're in one of those periods right now, where you have a lot of, militaristic rhetoric from different countries, and we're still in this mindset. They would have had to go beyond that to get into space and to not completely blown themselves up.
Well, you still have to, there's that part, right? Killing ourselves, but you still have to overcome all the other mass extinction possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's no guarantees. There is no guarantees.
No. And we've had 5, maybe 6 mass extinction events on this planet. Apparently, none of it involved technology or carbon emissions, right? It was, celestial events, cosmic events, global events. It's you have to survive all of that, and you have to survive maybe an alien invasion or two, right? You have to survive many things to get to the next level. Which is that part of maturity? Do we overcome this desire to kill each other and maybe change our moral compass? And would ET have gone through those same changes, and their moral compass isn't a destructive, negative one?
Yeah, we'd like to believe it's not a negative, destructive one. There's always people that feel that, there could be ones out there that don't have our best interests. We're even hearing this now from some of these UFO researchers who feel that they're either neutral or slightly hostile. You hear this rhetoric. I don't know if it's true. Again, we haven't had a public discussion about this, so we really don't know. But yeah, I think we know if they were able to get here, at least they have been able to avoid completely self-exterminating their species, and can put technology together. But then this always goes back to the Jacques Vallée question. Are they just using these ships and this technology because they know that that's something we understand in our time here, and it allows us to relate to them by thinking of them as having advanced technologies? Is it something that they're just putting on sort of as a show for us so that we don't totally flip out? Because if they just materialized right in front of us, it'd be too weird. So
Right.
by having devices and technologies and spaceships and flying saucers, I'm not saying this is true, but this is one of the directions the Vallée argument goes in. that this is sort of like a drama, a theater, like ET theater, that allows us to experience it without completely flipping out.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. You've got it's got to be an underarm softball pitch. It can't be a fastball.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That would make a lot of sense. And the other part with it, if disclosure happens and we look at the ideas, the fear-based type ideas that have been presented to us in the past, anarchy in the streets, the collapse of all global systems and religions and all of that, and that's why it hasn't happened. Well, I think clearly we have shown that we can handle that, right? I think the UFO subject is front and center, and we haven't freaked out, and that part of it I'm comfortable with. And if ET is getting here, they got here because they didn't kill each other off. That's it. And I think that they are at a conscious level of understanding and what binds the universe together. And I think that's it. It's almost like Occam's razor. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but I think it's the safest answer.
Right. There's always this idea that if they were hostile, they would have done whatever they were going to do before we had nukes and, weapon systems that could reach out into space and so forth. So, that's my thinking about it. I don't see a lot of evidence for any direct hostility. Even a lot of these, so-called abductions, whatever this is. I mean, we do experiments like that in a non-destructive way. We feel to animals, we capture them, we collar them. We just want to see where they're going. Then eventually the collar falls off on its own or something. I mean, it's not intentionally hostile. The animal might feel that it's hostile. It's just one point of view. And then there's all these people who feel that they've had a beneficial contact with these visitors. We hear about the scarier ones, But I mean, even listening to Travis Walton recently at Phenomicon and Vernal, I mean, he said he didn't think they were deliberately targeting him with some sort of energy beam. He felt it was like a random static discharge, that he was sort of the dope for getting too close, and they were saving his life by taking him aboard. So part of it could be our lack of understanding of who they are, not realizing that what they're doing may be just neutral, but to us it seems invasive. And I don't want to minimize the pain that sometimes, or fear that people feel from these encounters. It's just that we don't know what the intentions of these visitors are. We got to get them down here. We got to talk. We have to have a conference. We have to have them on a panel discussion. We'll have all the different species, and we'll get their points of view on this. I think that would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? A UFO conference with ET visitors.
For real.
That's what we need. That is what we need.
I think we're getting closer to that. I really do.
Have, guys.
I really do.
Discussion with them. Let's get us all out on the table. That's how I like to do things. Let's get it out there, and we'll find out a lot, and we'll move forward in this discussion where we just have a lot of questions right now and very little data or answers.
Simeon, another great show and conversation, my friend. Thank you so much. Where can everybody reach out to you?
Oh, sure. Feel free to go to my blog, newcrystalmind.com. And there's a link there. I'm happy to sign copies of books for people personally. And you've got signed copies are more fun. So go to my blog.
So you had mentioned to me that you're working on part 2 or an update on Black Swan.
I wrote this book, Black Swan Ghost, about all my contact with UFO and ET witnesses. About 25 of those contacts. I wrote it before the New York Times article came out in 2017, and I just realized it needed to be updated. I have talked to more people since it came out, so I'm coming out with a revised edition 2 in May, with more stories, incredible stories from people that have handled, crash materials, and people who've worked as missile security guards and have seen these things up close and personal.
Somebody just says, "Are you on Twitter?"
Yeah, sure. Of course. I'm on Twitter. I'll always think of it as Twitter.
Yeah.
And of course, YouTube, I've got an extensive YouTube channel. Just look up my name or Fractal Friend. I just put up a video today from an event in Medellin Falls, Washington, a Bigfoot event about the paranormal Bigfoot film that I have the poster of at the back there. And I put up about 10 minutes of some of that interaction. So yeah, go to my YouTube channel because I talk about these types of things a lot there.
Simeon, you're the best, my man. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jimmy. Take care.
Perfect show. That right there, that is why I do Fade to Black. Right there. It just keeps all of my research, all of my discussions, all of my shows, everything that I do keeps leading me back to the conversation that I just had with Dr. Simeon Hein. Perfect show. Thank you so much. And I want to remind everybody that tomorrow night, it is John Greenwald Jr. That's right. It is the Fade to Black Vault. Tomorrow night with John Greenwald Jr. You're not going to want to miss that. It's going to be another great conversation. Thank you, Simeon. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jonacide. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Dex. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. And this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night with John Greenwald, all I've got is go Backley Tappy.